Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome, Tom Donelson on the Donelson Files. Coco Konski is taking a sabbatical tonight, but I will be on with a special guest. Now, we have made some changes in our schedule. I'm going to apologize in advance. Will Riley will be on tomorrow night. He could not make it tonight. In fact, he's at the university he teaches at. He's got a COVID meeting, speaking of COVID. So he's going to be coming on tomorrow night to talk about research he's been doing. But I do have with me Justin Hart of Rational Ground. We'll talk more about Justin here in a couple of minutes. I am the chairman of America's PAC, which is one of those evil super PACs. I'm also a research associate, project director of America's Majority Foundation. I've overseen at least 35 studies over the past 10 years, and the author of 8 books, including The Rise of National Populism and Democratic Socialism, as well as the should-be boxing classic about the history of black boxers in America, Boxing in the Shadows. And like I say, all my books should be bestsellers, but they're not quite there yet. But for those people who want to know how to make sure that to help me make The Rise of National Populism, Democratic Socialism a big hit and a bestseller, you simply go to Amazon.com or to posthillpress.com. Now, call in 646-929-0130, 646-929-0130 to join us. And I'm going to introduce Justin Hart. Justin is and I'll let Justin describe himself, but he is one of the, I guess, are you the founder of Rational Ground or one of the founders?
One of the founders. We have a few there, and we've just launched our website, rationalground.com, as a fact-based, reason-based alternative to some of the chaos that your listeners will see in the COVID world.
Okay. All right. Well, so again, 646-929-0130. Okay, go ahead and Justin, kind of give people your background.
Yeah, my background is I'm basically an interim chief data officer, chief marketing officer for companies around the country and around the world. I work to help businesses understand how data, trends, charts, analysis can make their businesses work better. I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist, but I'm a darn good data guy. And one of the things we've been lacking sorely is darn good data in this COVID world. Now, normally, I wouldn't insert myself into other people's expertise and domains, but they sure seem to be inserting themselves into my domain a lot, into my life, into my education, into my business, into my health. And so they'll forgive me, I hope, if I check their math, and I've checked it, and frankly, it's all wrong. And it has been wrong from the beginning. My journey with sort of COVID started about 2 years ago when I was hospitalized with a staph infection. I had got a cut on my elbow, and for some reason, the staph, which is a natural flora on your skin, got into the bloodstream, and I was hospitalized for 2 weeks, nearly died of septic shock. Because I didn't understand that this tiny little thing in your body attacking this tiny little thing can become a very big thing for yourself. And so at that point, I started to study, like, what are the effects there? What are my chances of dying? What really happens here in virology and epidemiology and everything else that sort of associated with a pathogen or something that attacks your body and your body tries attacking it back. And when COVID came out, I was dutifully concerned. I saw this in January, saw it in February, and if the numbers were true, which were coming out of China, I was going to be very, very, very worried. Initially, the The WHO said the fatality rate was about 3.4, and they started making a lot of mistakes. And many of your listeners will be able to make these same assessments for themselves, because the basic function of virology and epidemiology is to understand the burdens that a society has to bear as they go through this. And so the CDC, for example, every season when they look at influenza, they say, okay, well, how many people are getting infected? How many people visit the doctor? How many of those have to be hospitalized? And how many of those, unfortunately, die? And if you think about it, in your business, you have the math to do this yourself. You have certain amount of people that are leads, that are opportunities that you want to pursue, and they become prospects for customers, and then eventually they convert to customers. And we call that the funnel, right? Well, there is a funnel involved in this. And that was my first clue that something was off, because as you started adding up the numbers from the first countries that started getting this, you realize something is off. This is not the Bird Box contagion movie pandemic that they had sort of planned this out to be. In the beginning, we were willing to go around with it. 14 days of a lockdown, let's take a look. We don't quite know much about it, but we learned about it very quickly. And now that 14 days has turned into 169 days. And this is really, our focus is all about trying to get America back to normal, back to work, and basically trying to quell the innate fears that have happened and been perpetrated by our elected leaders.
Well, but here's the thing, because I want to kind of make a point, because one of the things, people, because I got this Twitter minimizing the virus, and what I've tried to do, to me, is put it in proper context. And one of the first things I noticed, and I want you to kind of comment on this as well, the infection fatality rate, the IFR, is that when these numbers start coming, like in March or April, and around March, I said, you know what? If we get 2.2, about point, on my first time, we're not going to hit 1%. We've hit between 0.1% 1%, and I kind of guessed. My estimate was, you know what? If we hit about 0.5% fatality, which will be more than the flu, but certainly far less lethal than what we originally thought, which, by the way, is now becoming the scientific consensus. And
absolutely,
and I think sometimes people, and again, like I say, because I had somebody said, one of the Twitter, somebody tweeted me this afternoon, I, minimize this because she gave me a story about some poor guy who got really sick and ill, and said I view this as the flu, and I said, I've always say 0.2 to 0.6, which is more than the flu we've had since the '68 pandemic. Now, the 57-68 pandemic, based on what I've read, is very similar in lethality, but not necessarily the same in striking different population, but certainly the same in lethality.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the main things that people need to realize are the relative risks that you face in this. If I can tell you the difference, for example, one of the big differences between COVID and influenza is that if COVID killed like influenza, we would see thousands of dead teenagers and hundreds of deceased infants. The one thing we can say about COVID is it thankfully spares much of our youth. In fact, if you are under the age of 45, it's basically essentially approaching zero, the risk that you face for COVID. Well, when I say that someone who's under the age of 15 has a better chance of getting hit by lightning than dying of COVID, I'm not making that up. That's a statistical fact. And that's one of the things I try to do is relate these things, because not a lot of people know the context of what happens on a daily life in America, right? 5,000 people die every day. About 8,000 people die every week in nursing homes, 40,000 nursing home deaths in a month. And we have these gradations. So when you put it in that context and you understand that the average age of a COVID death is 78 and 80 compared to the 1918 pandemic, which I think was in the high 20s, the low 30s. Oh. Can you imagine if the median age of someone dying of COVID was 28, 29, and 30, right? When epidemiologists, when you look at this from a societal basis, obviously we mourn every death, but you make policies based on reality, right? Like we can empathize with someone who is going through a challenging incident in life, just like someone might empathize with me. I had a 30% chance of dying there in the hospital of septic shock. And I had to spend 2 weeks in the hospital. I had pleurisy of the lungs. It was very difficult. Someone can empathize with me. But I don't demand that people be welded inside their house, lose their jobs, have their kids locked to their desks for the next 6 months and lose 1,000 hours of in-person learning because of that. So those are the contexts.
Look, keep a hold of that thought. This is Tom Donelson with the Donelson Files here on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Greetings and great day, everyone. I am Elder Janelle Strickland, host of the Life Cafe radio broadcast from Maximizing Life Family Worship Center. I invite you to tune in every Saturday from 5 to 6 p.m. Tune in, maximize your life with the Word of God, and be blessed. Only on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Welcome back to the Donelson Files here with Tom Donelson, special guest Justin Hart of Rational Ground. And also don't forget the Batchelor News Radio Show with your host, L.A. Batchelor. The show discusses issues of race, policing, injustice, inequality, religion, and yes, even sports that affects black, brown, and poor people negatively. Listen live every Monday and Thursday from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time at blogtalkradio.com, L.A. Batchelor, and rebroadcast every day at 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on thebatchelornews.airtime.pro. You interested in having your own shows or advertising? Email us at labachelor40@gmail.com. And also, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget you can listen to this broadcast 3 a.m. and 10 a.m. every day Eastern Daylight Time at thebatchelornews.airtime.pro. 3 a.m., 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or midnight and 7 a.m. Pacific Time. So it's never too late to be well-informed and to listen to the Donelson Files. Call in at 646-929-0130, 646-929-0130. Okay. Now you kind of mentioned the point. Okay, you were seriously ill with septic shock, and so I guess maybe the question I'm going to ask you, what did you learn about our medical care or the medical system in those 2 weeks?
Well, I actually was impressed by our medical care. I had a very good virologist who was able to help me through infectious disease. A specialist there who helped me through those 2 weeks and beyond. And I think that's one of the big challenges that we look at, because the reason that we shut down, if you can remember back that far, was to basically avoid an issue where our hospitals might be overrun, right? Because the people who had made that policy thought so little of our healthcare system that they projected every hospital would turn into a MASH unit. I think you could probably put on one hand the number of hospitals that actually had serious overruns, and they were mostly centered around a couple zip codes right there in New York City. For the most part, there hasn't been a single state stat that causes me to concern over the entire course of the pandemic. You would need to recall, though, the people that basically said every hospital would turn into a MASH unit are the same ones that hate our healthcare system and want it to turn into a single healthcare paying system. And so part of this may have been purposeful, which is, can we overrun this here? But in the end, you saw, for example, the boats on either coast. You saw the massive convention centers being turned over. And I think you could probably, maybe there were 100 patients across all those multi-tens of millions of dollars that were spent to help for overages. Now, it was a good dry run, but frankly, I'm not going to go through that again. And one of the purposes of rationalground.com is to make sure that after this is over, we're helping people get the tools they need to change the policies. Because it's been amazing. Have you noticed how quickly things went from wash your hands to weld them inside, and how unelected officials, health directors, had so much authority over your life and your business and your church and your family's education. And so that needs to change. That's one thing that I think we've learned from this whole unfortunate episode.
Well, let me throw this out, because we've had, like I say, tomorrow night we're going to get more into lockdown versus non-lockdown states with Professor William Riley, who originally studied this, and wrote about it at the end of April in Spike, the British journal, and then he completed a study for America's Majority Foundation, America's PAC, dealing with, again, as a follow-up. And I guess the question I'm going to throw back to you is, we've had kind of this massive experiment, but let's look at the Swedish experiment. On one hand, the argument against the Swedish is that they had higher numbers than their fellow Nordic states. That would be the criticism.
Yeah, right. Now, if you look at that, there are a lot of details, and actually there's a great article on Zero Hedge today describing those there. One of the things you have to realize is that there's a lot of apples and oranges comparisons, but the virus is going to do what the virus is going to do. And a lot of times it's very unpredictable. Some of it can be attributed to seasonality. Some of it can be contributed to density. Some of it can be attributed to different age populations. Some of it can be attributed to how your previous flu season was. So, for example, one of the reasons that Italy got hit so hard was that they had a very light flu season at the end of 2019. And so, if you will, there was a lot of kindling, a lot of tinder that the COVID could burn through there. And typically, as this affects the older generations, most of the deaths that have happened from COVID are what we call pull forward deaths. If you are interned into a long-term care facility, you typically will exit that usually in death in about 3 to 6 months. So a lot of the deaths that we're seeing from COVID would have died this year. Now, that doesn't justify not stopping it. That just doesn't justify not, we have to mourn these deaths and everything else. But it does give you some perspective to understand, like, are these sort of in the trends of things that are flowing already, or is this something vitally and vastly new that we need to stop in its tracks and keep everyone inside? And I think the case is no, not for this one. And it's unclear whether keeping us inside would have stopped it anyways. Because you look at Hawaii, for example. I was supposed to be there in July. They were arguably one of the most locked down states. They're an island, right? And they had everything under control, and then boom, it opens up and it floods right in there. Now, don't look now, but if you look at deaths per million, we are just, I think, maybe 2 or 3 deaths away, or a couple hundred deaths away from meeting Sweden, where they are in their deaths per million. Eventually, every country has to go through the gauntlet on this thing. Thankfully, the gauntlet is just not that deadly as initially proposed.
Right, yeah, it's kind of follow up on that, because first of all, number one, why don't you explain to people the infectious fatality rate versus confirmed fatality rates? Because I think there's always that confusion.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the way that the CDC and other government entities track this thing is they look at, again, this kind of funnel. In terms of influenza, the way they track it every year, and you can go look it up. If you Google, for example, 2017-2018 estimated deaths, influenza, you'll see the whole stack they have there. And they have a table. It's really nice and clean. And basically they start at, okay, we have so many people that we think are infected. In the highest flu season we had recently, the 2017-18 season, they estimated 44 million people got infected. Then about half of those people, they say, went to the doctor, about 22 million. And then a portion of that, maybe 10+%, I can't remember the math off the top of my head, about 800,000 of them went to the hospital. And of those, between 60 and 100,000 of those people died from influenza and from the complications that come from it, right? The human body is not so concise and easy that it tells you this is what I'm dying from and this is what I died from. It's usually very complicated, as this week's news has borne out. And so we see the same thing. So the calculation that we're looking for is the deaths, that is the 60 to 100,000 deaths that we saw there, divided by the 44 million infections, which comes out to about 0.14 or so deaths, depending on how you're doing the calculations. And that's how you typically look at these things. You want to understand from a seasonal basis, are these deaths that we're seeing? And in fact, as CDC will admit, that a good portion of the deaths that we saw from COVID were deaths that probably would have happened from influenza and pneumonia and other diseases as well. So that's how they look at it. And so there's the case fatality rate and the infection fatality rate. And just a quick difference is the case fatality rate is we tested a lot of people and we know that they had the disease. The infection fatality rate is there were a lot of people that maybe had a sniffle, maybe had COVID, didn't even know it, and never went to the doctor, never got tested, but they should be counted in that as well. And that was the big change up, as we learned very quickly early in April, that a massive portion of the people who actually get COVID don't even know they have it, don't have any symptoms, and likely will never suffer any consequences from it. And when you take that into consideration, you realize that the fatality rate is probably about twice what it is for influenza. And so we have to get a good handle on this and understand it all together. But it doesn't attack ages by the same way influenza does. And that should be taken into account too. In fact, had we spent half as much of the energy as we did around masking people up and welding them in their houses and taking that energy towards protecting those who are most vulnerable in our long-term care facilities and nursing homes, we would have fared much better.
Now, again, let me put it this way. First of all, number one, right now, when you look at California, Texas, Florida, Arizona, and Georgia, would you say they're on the downside of the with hospitalization, deaths, in cases? Are you seeing a decline?
Absolutely.
From this?
Yeah. Yeah, and one way you can do that is, all of the data that we have originates at the county level. There are 3,141 counties around the country, and one of the things you can sort of think of those are beacons, right? These are beacons that are telling us all the data. The data from the county gets rolled up to the state reports it to the CDC or otherwise, and then we have, the results that we see on our dashboards days later. The data lags, which is a whole nother story. But on this purpose, what we're talking about is those counties, for example, at the height of the pandemic, 63 to 100 counties were reporting about 10 deaths a day or more. And now we're down to just 14 counties reporting 10 deaths a day or more. So that tells you kind of where we've come from the high point. And it's also, just think about it. Some of the beacons, a lot of the beacons are going dark, so to speak.
Okay, now let me put this. In California, where was the hardest hit in the most recent uptick?
Well, down here, I'm in San Diego, and Southern California, Los Angeles was particularly hard hit, I think because they have a very large population there. But, in terms of ratio, the number of beds that were occupied by COVID patients never got to a critical level. I think in all of California, it never went beyond 20% of any of the hospital beds. Now, here in San Diego, we're dutifully good neighbors, and we have a population here in San Diego of 3.3 million. The population of Baja California in Mexico is 3.3 million, but they have 5 times as many deaths as we do because their hospital systems really wasn't prepared for it or because they have other factors there. And so we had a caravan of ambulances that were taking people from the border each day to our local hospital conglomerates. Now, unfortunately for us and our businesses, that counted, we think, against our population. And so the hospital rate was unseemingly high, but for false pretenses. A lot of those came south of the border. And by one account, by one hospital down there, I have it from inside information, 35% of all COVID patients had contact travel with Mexico. So a lot of that was coming from south of the border. But now, for example, across the board in California, our hospitalizations are the same number they were at the beginning of April. And so it's very low, and we're thankful for that.
All right. Again, if we're at that point, again, California is weathering the storm. You can say Florida is weathering the storm. And they're on the downside, very similar to where New York was in May when they started their downside. when the first of all, explain the concept of herd immunity. If somebody says to you herd immunity, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, in terms of herd immunity, the worst case scenario would be an outbreak of polio, and that would take a lot of people, because it's very infectious, to surround, if you will, the person who has polio, people that might be immune to it, to keep other people from getting it, if you will. But one of the things that we've learned very quickly is that herd immunity in terms of other pathogens has required a population to reach 60%, 80%. Just to give you an idea, these viruses don't go away. We still have impacts of the 1889 Russian flu and the 1918 and the 1957 and the 1969 and the 2009 H1N1. Those are all still with us. And if you pull up the CDC chart, and when they're putting their mixture and concoction together for this year's flu shot, they typically say, well, we're seeing a lot of H1N1. We should put in some stuff for that, right? And my guess is that this will probably roll into that feature set as well. But what we've found, thankfully enough, is that there is a lot of cross-immunity. Now, the uniqueness of coronavirus, of this SARS-CoV-2, is that it is a coronavirus. Now, it just so happens that 30% of all common colds are this type of virus, but SARS-CoV-2 gets into your body, and that's what creates the disease called COVID. But what we're finding is that there is a lot of cross-immunity, or likely a lot of cross-immunity, so that a lot of people having common colds will be having no problem whatsoever withstanding the barrage that SARS-CoV-2 brings and avoid COVID-19 altogether. So the percentage that you typically would want to see, about 60 or 70% of the population before you say, we have herd immunity, is now as low as 10 or 20%. And we can see that in the flow of things. If you look at California, Florida, Arizona, Texas, as we call them, the FACT, who were this sort of secondary wave that we saw coming through the country on these lower populations. There's a seasonality aspect to that, but we won't get into that. Notice that they're all on the same parallel there, on the same latitude. That's another story for another time. But what we know is that as soon as each one of those states hit about 10 to 15%, everything started going down, so that by the time the thing peters out, about 20, 25% of the population will have received it. And that's why you look up in New York City, they're all clapping themselves on the back for being so good at social distancing and masks. It really had nothing to do with that. They're already at 23%. The serology studies that are out there show that.
And here at the Donelson Files, Coco Constantine is on sabbatical, but she will be back with us tomorrow, along with Will Riley of Kentucky State University. Again, we had to make some changes due to scheduling, but we appreciate Justin for coming on tonight, and Professor Riley will be joining us tomorrow. Here on the Donelson Files on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
I never get the flu.
My kids don't need more shots.
I don't have time.
We're all healthy.
My asthma's under control.
I'm pregnant.
I've had the flu. It's not a big deal.
My kids are too old for flu.
The media is exaggerating.
I can fight it naturally.
No matter how you build your excuses, the flu can blow your house down. Keep your foundation strong. Vaccinate. Learn more at flu.gov.
A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
This is Tom Donelson here with the Donelson Files. Welcome back. Here's the thing. Here's the phone number you need to call, 646-929-0130. Or if you're just on Twitter right now, you can tweet at the Donelson Files as well. So that, too, is another way to get your questions answered if you choose to participate in today's show. And don't forget, here on the Donelson Files, every day, 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. on the thebatchelornews.airtime.pro, you can listen to this show twice a day, 3 a.m., 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 12 and 7 a.m., 12 midnight or 7 a.m. Pacific Time here on the Batchelor News Radio Network. All right. let me ask you this question. Now, speaking of the flu,
right.
Here's the thing. We're running right into the flu season. And,
correct. The flu starts at week 39, just around the corner.
Yeah. And the question I'm going to throw back, because it seems to me like I say, I've got my notice, from the local pharmacy, come get your flu shot. But I think it's, to me, the one thing that I kind of fear more than everything else, if you have a flu season on top of this, what the panic, what the additional, and certainly, the other thing is, I had a conversation with another individual. I said, well, you got a lot of patients who survived the COVID, maybe, a little bit elderly, a little bit frailer, and they may have had a much worse than a mild case, possible lung discovery. How do you kind of view that? Plus, flu season also, the flu tends to hit younger patients harder than, let's say, COVID. So if you're sitting there planning, you're the California Health Commissioner, what's your advice to the public at this point, dealing with the flu, dealing with COVID, how to deal with this whole mess?
Look, I think one of the challenges that we've had, if you recall, the flatten the curve issue, wasn't about reducing the number of deaths we're going to get anyway from the virus. It was about lengthening them out until we could, for example, handle the issues of the hospital, which wasn't an issue, or until we got some sort of treatments, which we have now. We have some really good treatments that are lowering the case fatality rate altogether. And so the problem that you're going to have is there are a lot of communities, for example, north of me in the Bay Area, who are going to start coming out of hibernation, and they're going to be butting up right now up against flu season. So you very well may have, in certain situations, a double whammy where people are facing both COVID and the flu, which is why it's so important that the only way through the virus, the only way over the virus is through it, right? I'll give you an example. One of the things that I'm very thankful for are for the Latino community here in Southern California. And the reason why is that they basically ignored a lot of social distancing after Memorial Day. And they just said, this is just, we get together on the 4th of July as families. Nothing's going to stop us from doing that. The Latino, the largest growing population of cases in California was Latinos between the ages of 18 and I think 34. Now, the cool thing is, or the interesting thing is, that at the end of May, there were about 20,000 cases of that. Now, there are over like 100,000 cases of Latinos between the ages of 18 and 34. But guess what? The deaths went from 20 to like 60, right? 20, right? Very like statistically unmentionable in many ways. And of course, these are deaths that we mourn. But the lesson learned there is that if you're under the age of 45, your chances of dying of COVID are very, very slim. And in fact, what that did is it created immediate herd immunity for that population and for populations here in Southern California. I can't say the same for some of these same populations that continue to hide from the virus and think they can hide from the virus, only to come out in the open and face it along with flu season. But in truth, I think the worst is actually behind us as I see it, and we're not going to have a second wave. In fact, most of the experts out there who were crying about this coming to the 1918, you remember the 1918 pandemic, as they told us, had an initial sort of bout, and then the real big wave came in the fall. It looks like we're not going to see that at all here in the fall. So we could be very thankful, but again, this is just something that you have to get through. There's no way over it except for through it.
Well, but let's go for this. Here's a thought. I'll throw this out as a thought. Is to me, if I was sitting there as the health commissioner, I would say, I would almost advise everybody, from students all the way up to elderly, get your flu shot. So the two reasons for that to me would be, number one, if you get an illness, doesn't feel right, a doctor can say, have you had your flu shot? The first thing he may do is he may say, I'm going to test you for COVID first, working on the assumption that the flu, eliminate the flu as a diagnostic. And certainly children are far more vulnerable to the flu than they are to COVID. that would be to me. Now, the question I would throw back is when we get the the COVID-19 vaccine, depending on how quickly we do, is that something you want to universally give everybody? Or do you sit back and say, we'll start with the vulnerable first and see what the side effects are with the risk versus benefit? Your thought?
Yeah, we usually vaccines take years to develop, so pushing something through like this is very dangerous. But it's also welcome. We want to try it out and see what's going on. But look, people think of vaccines as a panacea. The CDC will admit that vaccines only reduce the deaths in an influenza season by maybe 10, maybe 12% or so. I don't know if you know that, but the efficacy of vaccines and flu shots is maybe around 30 or 40%. Now, that's terrific. I'm really glad that we're able to avoid those burdens on our society when certain people are able to overcome the flu very quickly because of flu shots. But it is not a one-shot solution for this thing. We have a governor of a major state tweeting out today that they're not going to open up until there's a vaccine, and I'm afraid they're going to be very sorely disappointed. Because the flip side of keeping people inside is massive. It is not an exaggeration to say that more people will die from the lockdowns than will ever die from COVID. And I can show you on different age ranges how that is. For example, if you're a teenager, a high schooler, there are typically about 3 to 5 to 6,000 suicides per year across the country. A simple 1% uptick in that because of the shutdowns, which is generous, would absolutely eclipse several times over the number of deaths from COVID. More kids will commit suicide from the shutdown than will ever be harmed by COVID. And then you looked at, for example, 85% of living organ transplant surgeries were not done. 2/3 of cancer screenings were not done. Go to Virginia, go look at their child immunization records. They're down by half. Can you imagine? I mean, we're actually losing lives on the far end because we've deemed it necessary to quarantine healthy people. It's insane what we've done. It literally has no precedent, and the fear has gripped us so tightly that our policy has gone whack.
Well, let me throw this because it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback because here's the thing: you're a governor, you're the president, and you got Tony Fauci, who basically in February was looking at this is 0.1 to 1%, maybe we could get through this. Suddenly in March he said you got to have a 2% mortality rate. The WHO is saying 3 to 4%. 2 million Americans, which would be basically the equivalent of what the Spanish flu would be today, going on a per capita basis. I guess my question would be, if you're the president or you're the governor and you're being told, hey, we're going to lose 2 million people, certainly you're going to react differently than you can say, well, we are going to have a virus that is going to hit 95% of the people are going to have comorbidity, our senior citizens, as opposed to younger population, and we may lose maybe 200,000. And we could avoid some of that by simply not putting COVID patients in nursing homes.
Sure. But the problem is we have never, ever in the history of these pandemics shut down entire sectors of the economy. There have been a couple towns that have been quarantined. There have been a couple populations. But we have never, ever done anything like we've done where every single state basically shut down massive industries and we had double-digit unemployment populations. And the impact is massive. When we turned and said, well, you know what, anything that is beyond COVID can't come into the hospital. There were 650,000 Americans who have cancer. They're on chemotherapy. And during the first 2 months of lockdown, half of them didn't come into chemotherapy. Right there. Boom. That's enough dead to completely overshadow what's happening there. Thousands of tumors were biopsies, known tumors, 2/3 of cancer screenings that weren't done, half of childhood immunizations, as I mentioned. And that's just the medical part. When one sociologist noted that for every percentage of unemployment that a population realizes, you can add 41,000 deaths due to depression, suicide, overdoses, drug use, alcohol abuse, or general theft and things that happen that way. So you do the math, 25 times 41,000. right? And this is just, we have never done this. So when we talk about Monday morning quarterbacking, all of a sudden the team started playing like cricket in the middle of a football game. And we're like, what is going on? We've never done this before, and we should never, ever do it again.
Yeah. This is Tom Donelson. Coco Constantine, my co-host, is on sabbatical tonight. But we do have Justin Hart of Rational Ground. So Donelson Files on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
This is Dr. Larry Fedowa, host of the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network, inviting you to listen live every Wednesday evening from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time at blogtalkradio.com, and the podcast every Monday through Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time at thebatchelornews.airtime.pro. I am called the philosopher of current events, an independent, open-minded conservative with my own ideas. If you are interested in advertising or having your own show, email us at labachelor40@gmail.com.
This is Tom Donelson. Welcome once again to the Donelson Files. First of all, don't forget you can listen to this show again on the thebatchelornews.airtime.pro, 3 a.m., 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or midnight or 7 a.m. Pacific Time on the Batchelor News Radio Network. And don't forget you can call in at 646-929-0130, 646-929-0130. Okay, back to where, we were talking. All right, let me ask you this question. Do you see the rationale, for example, opening up the sporting events by keeping them free of crowd?
I think there's some rationale in a few incidents of where things go. Large crowds, for example. I always attend a certain conference up in San Francisco that brings 100 to 200,000 people every year. And I might have second guesses about going to something like that. But I think in general, that's probably the exception. I would say one of the problems that we have is that we've come to realize in the last month some very, very keen things on what we call the asymptomatic problem. That is, we believe that there are a lot of people who don't know they have COVID because they have no external signs of COVID, but they still might be contagious. Well, the literature now is almost definitively against that the transmission from asymptomatic people to other people is very, very, very low. And imagine what impact that has. The reason we're all shut down, asymptomatics. The reason that we're all shut down from schools, asymptomatics. The reason that we can't go to movie theater, it's all because of that, right? And so now we have to sort of change our rethinking. And again, it's just another notch on this awful, awful experience that we've had where our scientists have been very wrong on a lot of things that have impacted a lot of people. But I would say there's general precautions that we can take, and we can feel good about those. But, like masks are an interesting problem. I'm not necessarily an anti-mask person. I just know the science and know that it's rather ridiculous. But when I go out, I dutifully wear a mask because my fellow Americans are seriously scared. When they did a recent poll, a survey of Americans, and they asked what percentage of people in America have died of COVID. And the average answer, Tom, was 9. People think that 9% of the population have died of COVID. They believe 30 million people have died of COVID. And so there's this just massive fear-mongering that's going on. And when I tell them that if you're under 65, your chances of dying of COVID are the same chances that you take driving to your commute on your way to work every day. And if you're over the age of 65, your chances of dying are about the same as dying if you're a professional truck driver. So a little higher, but not very much. And when you put it in that perspective, we should try to dissipate this fear as much as possible. I think the pendulum needs to swing back.
Okay, let me throw this. We'll go to California. Now, as a state, compared to other states, they've done fairly well death per capita. I would probably say if you look at the top most populous states, and I'm looking at Florida, Texas, Ohio, Georgia, California, New York, Illinois, Pennsylvania, 4 of which are red states, 4 of which will be blue states. They have the lowest, but they also their economic side of the equation. Let me see if I can get their unemployment number. Is okay. The July unemployment is 13.3%. Percentage of claims, which is the most recent civilian population, is like 16% are in unemployment claims. I guess the question is, first of all, number one, what did California actually do right that New York, Illinois, Pennsylvania, other states, in particular New York, did wrong? At least,
well, we don't know yet, frankly. I mean, we've been masked up since March, and we thought that would save us. But then our cases basically burst upon the scene, mostly here in Southern California because we were close to the border and because of seasonality issues that happened. And so what we're finding is that, again, as I said, I don't know that California is through the gauntlet yet. I think they still have some ways to go, and we'll see. If you look on a county basis, some of the highest per capita death counties are right here in California, right at the border. So while it's fair to say, California on a whole, from a massive population, did pretty well, the game isn't over. And also our counties that did go through the gauntlet here in Southern California, a lot of them didn't fare very well at all.
Well, yeah, but except follow that. Okay, I'm not going to play a devil advocate in this regard, because you've already made the point that, in particular, the Latino community, that the younger Latinos have basically been the ones getting infected at a high rate, and certainly,
correct,
the percentage in California. I'm going to get, on top of my head, I don't know those numbers. You may know it, but I know in Florida, the last time I checked, it was like in the mid-40s. 3 months ago, it was in the mid-70s. And certainly when you have a younger population getting sick, the overall death rate won't spike anywhere near as high as if you have a higher percentage of the elderly getting sick. And certainly California, based on what I'm seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, are in that category where there's, the younger patients tend to be the ones getting the most sick.
No, the younger patients are doing just fine. I mean, they go into the hospital. Yeah. It's basically an in-out procedure. They get a shot. And I think that California had the fortune of going through its wave in July and in June and July rather than April and May, because we didn't have a lot of the treatments. We didn't know a lot about these things. And you can see that in Florida, for example. Florida did a masterful job. They have a massive increase in cases there, but they've been able to quell it very well as far as the number of hospitalizations, the case fatality rate among the other, the main age groups has basically halved every month as we've approached things, because we've realized a lot of things that can help in this procedure. But I think in general California did okay, especially compared to New York and New Jersey. But I'm cautious, because I know we're still hiding. We're still hiding from the virus. We have a park down the way, and the swings are still tied up. I can't let my kids go outside and play. I have 2 kids who are still going through Zoom classes right now in the other room, right? And we have like 0 deaths in the last 5, 6, 7 days here in San Diego. So it's super frustrating to see that, and I think it basically just you're prolonging the inevitable. And I fear what happens when California finally says, oh, well, we can all come out, and then they may lock down again, which is what happened in the last few weeks. We opened up, and then they got concerned because cases increased. Deaths did not. Neither did hospitalizations, but they freaked out, and everything petered down from there.
Well, man, but that's this quick question here. Dealing with the elderly, was California following closer to what Florida did as far as, like nursing homes, not putting COVID patients in nursing homes, but certainly concentrating on that? Would you say they were similar to that versus what they did in New York and New Jersey, which was the complete opposite?
Well, initially, in the first stages, they did exactly what New York and New Jersey did, which was really unfortunate. But we'll be able to know here in the next little bit what really transpired. It's difficult to say right now because data is still coming in.
Yeah. Well, have they continued? My question is, did they continue to do that, or did they quit doing it quickly?
No, I think they quit doing that. Again, we're still trying to get all the data we want from the state. We have to sue the state and the counties to get the data we want because we don't hear from them a lot. So it's unfortunate.
All right. Well, the reason I kind of put that up because if you're at that point where, again, if you're looking at herd immunity, where the younger patients are tending to get more and more of the ones getting infected, and they're the least likely to die, and they're more likely to have the herd immunity. It would sound like to me California is at that point where, they're not going to get anywhere near where New York was, and they may be closer to where Texas and Florida are right now, as opposed to.
Well, I hope so, but consider that San Francisco is as far away from San Diego as New York is from North Carolina, and so this is not like a sales tax that affects the whole state on the gas prices overnight. This is something that has to regionally sort of get there. New York is as far from San Diego, for example, as Moscow is from Gibraltar. And so that's why it took so long for these things to sort of work their way through, especially as the country shut down, the airlines shut down, the roads shut down. And so, San Francisco, and I'm actually from the Bay Area. My parents still live up there. And my parents are in an age bracket where, they're in a risk factor as well. But I'm concerned for my friends in the Bay Area because they've waited so long to open up. And now when they do, who knows what's going to happen.
Well, again, let's go back to the economic side. California is still, once again, what is the economic cost as you see it? Because, you look at, the unemployment numbers, it's like in July, they're 13.3. The only, and the question I would throw back is, which is going to cost you more in the long run? Shutting the economy down, where you basically are shutting off businesses and communities, versus trying to deal with the virus. What's the
problem is that our entire mindset has to change. You've seen, for example, a lot of schools come online and then quickly close down. Colleges, universities, high schools, elementary schools, because they see a few cases. They had, for example, I think 160 cases recently, University of Louisiana, wherever it was. Not one of them went to the hospital, but that shut down the school. And it was a ridiculous decision. And so we have to change our mindset because cases are not bad. But until that happens, California is going to stay shut down because all the health directors and Governor Newsom and everyone that's sort of at the state level fears cases, and they don't understand how a virus operates and that you have to you go through it to get over it. So I think we're kind of stuck. We're kind of stuck in a very difficult situation.
Yeah. All right. First, let's before we go any further, I do want to have you talk about Rational Ground and some of the people that you are working with.
Yeah,
so
I think misery loves company, and I think I like that too. We definitely are. I would say there's about 20% of the country that are classified as agoraphobics, if you will, when it comes to this pandemic, and don't want to open up anything, would like to stay down, shut down. I think there's about 60% or so of people who are kind of like, I don't know what to think because this is what I've been told. And there's another 20, maybe 30% of people like myself who are, looking at the numbers and saying the impact of the shutdowns is not commensurate with the impact of the virus. And so myself, my colleague Aaron Jin, who wrote a fantastic article about evidence over fear, and that was quickly taken down by its publisher because they didn't like it. And we've seen this again and again as we've tried to fight the powers that want to keep us shut inside. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not normally one to fight against the powers that have credentialed themselves in this domain, but they are inserting themselves into my life in a way where I said, I'm going to check your math. And when we go and check the math, we realize the math is way off. So there's a host of us at rationalground.com. And what we do is we provide guidance to governors, to congressional leaders, to counties especially, to activist groups who are trying to get their counties open. A lot of this is because, they don't know the information. They only see what they report in the press, and that's a very difficult and challenging thing. So we're hoping that we can see better days in helping people understand what's happening. We provide, charts, analysis, infographics that really help people come to terms with what we're experiencing here.
Well, could you give us some names of other people who are working with you?
Sure. We've got a great, a lot of these are under nom de jeux of, for example, Hold2, who is one of our great analysts up there, and he does some fantastic work. We work with Phil Kerpen, who has been doing some tremendous work putting together long-term care facility numbers. We work with Kyle Lamb, who's a podcaster like himself, and he has a tremendous clout as far as building up charts. We've got a host of people have different expertise. I've got one guy out of Tennessee who's like the go-to person on all things Tennessee. So there's a lot of people that we're very, very proud to associate with who have a lot of great following online and elsewhere. But mostly we're just like-minded people who have read the numbers and realized that the overreaction is such that we need to make some serious changes.
Okay, and again, kind of tell everybody how they can Rational Ground. They got to repeat the how they can get to Rational Ground, as well as follow up on your Twitter site where they can follow you on Twitter.
Sure, it's rationalground.com, and my Twitter handle is Justin_Hart. And you can find us on Facebook at Rational Ground, or we have a Facebook page. You can just search for a group called Let's Get Back to Work. That's really what we're all about, is making sure people are able to get back and provide for their families.
Okay. And I guess we got about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to tell you, if somebody said to you in about 2 minutes, summarize COVID, 2 minutes summary what we should know about COVID.
Yeah, the deal is that they sold us a pandemic that was supposed to close every hospital. They welded us all inside our homes because of the fear of the impact of that pandemic. That bill of goods they sold us never panned out, and we never then reacted commensurately to release people from these lockdowns. And that's really what it comes down to. Pandemics should be taken seriously. We should have the tools in place to deal with them. We should facilitate whatever protections we can for the most vulnerable populations among us. We should mourn those who have been impacted by this. But COVID-19 is a pandemic on the scale of something we've seen before in 1957, 58. It'll be around for a while, and we'll deal with it well. But the fear that we have is a reaction that we need to overcome. 400 years ago, in the plague, there was an author who talked about that in Milan, Italy. And he talked about how the fear that gripped people's minds was more powerful than the impact and fear of the virus itself. And so I hope that we can come to a conclusion where we're able to wrap this up and find solutions and put in place some type of logical, reasoned, rational approach towards dealing with this from public policy.
All right, well, thank you very much, Justin Hart. I appreciate you taking your time and doing so at the last moment. Tomorrow night, Will Riley will be joining us. Coco Konski and I will be questioning him on his most recent research. This is Tom Donelson here on the Donelson Files on the Batchelor News Radio Network saying good night.
Hey, we want to welcome our listeners to You and the Law on the Batchelor News Radio Network with my co-host and best friend, Chief Swag Humphrey. How you doing today, brother?
Man, you're overdoing it with that best friend thing, man. I tell you, I haven't given you permission to say that.
Oh, you know what? I forgot, man. Let me.
I'm just kidding.
I forgot.
Man.
I forgot, man.
You know you're my boy, man. You know you're my boy. You know you're my boy, man. Just playing with you, man.
How you doing today, sir? How you?
Brother, I'm doing good, brother. How about you, man?
Oh man, I'm doing good, man. Just trying to stay dry. You know, I think we're in 2 states, man, where we're getting a lot of rain.
We're getting a lot, man. A lot of rain.
Yeah, a lot of rain, and you know, with a lot of other things going on. So, hey, you know, we want to welcome our listeners to You and the Law, the Batchelor News Radio Network. This is part 3 of a series of our conversation about bridging the gap, and this week, Keith, we're going to be talking about, in this era of divide, how does the law enforcement community go about bridging the gap with so many things going on. So we've got an exciting show ahead of us, a lot of good conversations about bridging the gap, and how do you go about doing that in the black community. But, you know, Keith, once again, we're on, and several things have happened since our last show last week, and it's just feel like, man, there's just some trying times for the country we're living in, and law enforcement is kind of right in the middle of it.
Well, you know, we are the first line of defense daily, and so we have no choice. We can't turn our backs on it, and so that's why it's really important for us to have those positive relationships in our communities, with our communities and things like that, to try to navigate through these tough times, because there are, man, I've never seen anything like this in my 32 years law enforcement.
Well, I think, you know, it just seems like, you know, the more people that, you know, you have conversations with, it's almost like, we're instead of going forward, we're going backwards in that relationship that with the black community and with any minority community, but it seems like the black community is just at the forefront of having that racial divide between their local police. And, you know, somebody asked me, you know, well, somebody made the comment that, you know, oh, that's kind of, these are isolated incidents. Yeah, some of them are isolated, but, you know, Keith, the sad thing about it is when you hear almost in every state, there's something going on that is involving, you know, the killing of an unarmed black person, or something that is questioned about how police have interacted with the black community. And, you know, just yesterday, I think there's news about a shooting in L.A. where a gentleman was riding a bicycle, and he was shot. And so there's some things that this country and every community really needs to have some serious conversations about the direction of policing and where policing is going, especially with a pandemic that we're still dealing with, and a presidential election.
Yeah, and you know, it doesn't give the community any make them feel any better when they know that the DOJ, when you have the Attorney General that's basically saying that let's let police departments do their job, to stop stepping in. It's not the federal government's job to investigate those type of things. Let police handle their business by any means necessary. I mean, that doesn't help either.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And Keith, I want to remind those who are listening to the show that the call-in number to the show is 646-929-0130. That's 646-929-0130. When you call into the show, you may hear some silence. The show producer will ask you if you have a comment or if you'd like to come on air. So, if you have a comment, let the producer know. He'll get that to us, and or if you would like to just come on air and have a conversation with us, just let him know that, hey, you have a question and you would like to speak with us directly, because you will be on live. So, Keith, a lot of people, when they call in, they hear us talking and they kind of, they don't say anything. So we want to make sure that everybody's given an opportunity to either just listen to the show or just call in and share your comments with us. So because
we want to hear
that's
from
what this,
you. We want to hear from
yeah,
you.
we want to hear from you.
We do.
Yeah, and that's what this show is about. I mean, we are, we discuss matters related to you and law enforcement, and to really, from our perspective of being in law enforcement, to give some, educated information to our listeners, and just have that honest conversation, as we stated on every show. This is a show where we're going to talk about things that may be uncomfortable to talk about, but we're going to talk about them. Everybody may not agree with our opinions or maybe that conversation, but that's what a good open dialogue is all about. Is we can agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, how are we going to make the situation better than what it is currently right now?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I couldn't say it any better.
Yeah, and Keith, this past week, with so many things happen, and it's almost, it takes a lot to kind of keep up with everything that's going on across the country. And, several things have been posted to our social media Facebook page. We want to remind our listeners that you can also follow us on our social media platform, which is on Facebook. That's You and the Law on Facebook. You can also follow us on Instagram, and that's You_in_the_law. And you can also follow us on Twitter at YouTheLaw1. So have comments, please leave your comments on our Facebook page. Go to our Facebook page and like the page and share the page and with your family and friends. And so, Keith, one of the things that we're going to be talking about earlier on in the show is an incident that took place in the state of Arkansas, where a sheriff was
man.
It is. And a lot of people, Keith, is kind of like, you shake your head, and it's kind of like we're in 2020. And so here's a sheriff who has since resigned, and he was having his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend or whatever she is. She recorded the conversation where he used the N-word repeatedly because she spoke to a gentleman inside of a store in DeWitt, Arkansas, and not too far from where I served as a police chief in Arkansas a few years ago, and probably 2 hours from Little Rock, Keith. But it's very disturbing audio to listen to. And so for our listeners, we're going to play some of that. We're going to play that clip and a clip of a news release out of a news station out of Little Rock, who actually interviewed the gentleman that the former sheriff was actually talking about. His girlfriend had a conversation in a store with somebody that she knows, and he felt like she shouldn't have been talking to this Ian. And so real disturbing. And the fact that this is one of the highest elected officials in law enforcement as a sheriff, and he has that type of racial overtone, Keith. So very disturbing, man. So, Keith, we're going to take our first.
Very embarrassing.
Yeah, it is. It is. So we're going to take our first break, and you're listening to You and the Law on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
I'm not blaming nothing on you. I just...
every motherfucker in that store, you got to talk to the fucking dreadlocked ass nigger. Right there in front of me, like y'all fucking big
I didn't think it was a big deal.
It is a big fucking deal. Well, people fucking see me and see you talking to fucking niggers.
And they know that.
News tonight, the Arkansas County Sheriff has resigned after a video of him using racial slurs made the rounds on social media. This morning, the Arkansas County Quorum Court calling a special meeting and calling for his resignation. Claire Kreitz joining us now with more on what unfolded today. Claire.
Yeah, that's right, Bob. At first, Sheriff Todd Wright held his ground, saying he didn't mean it the way it came off and he would not resign. After more community members took the podium expressing their feelings about the video and the racial slurs used, he ultimately changed his mind and resigned effective immediately. Nothing but cheers coming from the lawn outside the Arkansas County Courthouse as Todd Wright took his final walk as sheriff.
Thankfully, with everyone's help, he decided to resign today, effective today.
County Judge Eddie Best says his resignation comes after this video circulated on social media.
Why you gotta holler when I'm around?
In it, Wright can be heard saying a racial slur at least 8 times.
For him to come out like that, it was just heartening because I know, that hurt a lot of people's feelings.
This is like my first time ever having to deal with any type of racism.
Dominic Clark says he is the person Wright is referring to in the video.
People like myself, scared to go outside, scared to drive a vehicle, scared to walk past a cop, for, fear of being profiled just because you're black.
In a special called Quorum Court meeting, court and community members spoke up calling for his resignation.
Someone got to his heart and he decided to step down.
Clark says he's happy Wright is out of office, but wonders about the rest of the department.
It makes you think about the whole force.
Judge Best says he hopes this swift action proves the county will not tolerate racism going forward.
Quorum Court is not going to let an elected official operate in that manner.
I did reach out to Todd Wright. He did not have a comment at this time. Judge Best says the county will declare a vacancy September 8th at their next Quorum Court meeting. That's when they will decide whether to appoint someone or hold a special election. Bob?
All right, Claire, thanks.
Hey, we want to welcome our listeners back to You and the Law on the Batchelor News Radio Network. We just listened to an audio recording of the sheriff in Arkansas who has since resigned for using racial slurs, and we want to also a clip that was provided by a local Little Rock TV station who actually interviewed the gentleman who the sheriff was referring to in his tirade with his girlfriend. So very disturbing audio clip, Keith. The fact that highly elected official it's inexcusable, and the fact that he basically in the beginning felt like he was not going to try to say that he didn't mean it the way it came out. How do you explain that? So, it's real disturbing that you've got an elected official who
that was anger, man.
Yeah, that was real anger.
That was real anger toward that, both his girlfriend and the gentleman that she was saying. I mean, that was one of those that he just exploded. It's sort of like he had that bottled up in him for so long. I mean, I know we all have bad days. We all have trying times, but it was like, he was looking for that moment to express those words and those feelings.
Yeah, and one of the things, I had a conversation with somebody who made the comment that this is probably an everyday thing. We can't say that because again, this was something that was leaked and put out on social media by the person who recorded it. So again, it goes to this question, Keith, is here's a sheriff who has been around for that agency for over 30 years, and a lot of people are now asking the question: what is the culture of that law enforcement agency? Are there other officers who have worked under this sheriff who have the same thoughts about blacks in that community? And this is up around the Pine Bluff area, so there's a large population of blacks who live in that part of Arkansas, and the fact that you listen to the gentleman who was involved in this, Keith, and he's like, hey, as a black man, I'm kind of fearful of even just driving around. What are the police going to do? So it just goes back to the conversation that we're having about bridging the gap and the fact that there is such a distrust between the black community and law enforcement. And can law enforcement really some kind of way start working to repair the damage that has been done?
Oh, absolutely. I think every day is a job interview. Every day is an opportunity to change the perception and the reality that some people have when it comes to law enforcement. You just can't. You can't stop. When you have things like this, any police department, even the department that he was the sheriff of, now this is an opportunity to get out, listen, and come up with game plan, ask the community to help. This is that opportunity, but you do have those organizations that run and hide. You don't see them. You won't see them in the community. They'll try to keep a low profile because they think that's the right thing to do. Well, that's the wrong thing to do. The right thing is to stand up, admit you made a mistake. Let's move forward. Help us grow. Help us grow. Help us be better. Help us be better than this. We've got a stain on us right now. How do we clean that stain, or how do we make that stain smaller? That's what you've got to do, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be overnight. It's not going to. It may not even take. It may be longer than a year or years, but it can be done.
Yeah, it definitely can be, and especially with. You've got so many people in the communities who are really working to try to make some change and the whole people accountable. But one of the things is that law enforcement has to really embrace that and really want to be a part of that change. And it's kind of like that saying: you take one step forward and you take two steps back. And it's, I listened to an FOP president who made the comment that, it's almost like no matter what law enforcement does, it's not right. And, you kind of have to think about that. How do you put that into context, Keith, is that, if you're trying to say that the community, no matter what you do, you're still not going to be doing anything right. So, but you have to listen to the people in your community and understand their concerns, because I think the message is clear, Keith, that policing in America is broken, and there must be some change, and the question is about how do you go by doing that change with policing across the United States?
I don't know. You have to have courage. You have to have courage to stand up and do it. And I've said this before: admit you're wrong. Let's move forward. Help us grow. But I will tell you that as an African American, I know for a fact that African Americans have given law enforcement so many opportunities to want to believe in us, want to really truly believe in community policing, partnerships, safety, and things like that. But then when we see things like we've seen on TV and the things that we hear police say, especially about communities of color or those individuals that might be in a lower socioeconomic category, it's disheartening and it's very difficult. People might forgive, but they don't forget. And so I think that's the biggest thing that the law enforcement needs to take from this.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, there has to be an honest discussion about how to reform policing. And I think some people in the policing community may say, well, there's no need to reform policing. We're doing everything right. That they may have a problem, but we don't have a problem. But I think when you look at the things that have occurred, you have to even acknowledge some of the things that may be occurring in your agency that obviously is not getting any media attention. And you know, I've said this before, Keith. You know, cities are you're 1 day away or 1 hour away from being a Ferguson or from being a Kenosha, Wisconsin, or from being Louisville, Kentucky, because it takes just the action of one or two police officers to set things in motion to where people will protest. They will talk about how that incident took place, but you have to be able to acknowledge that there are some things that are going on, and it may not be known to the public. So, and I think that's a conversation, Keith, that agencies should really have is about how do you fix some problems that are within your department before they become a Ferguson or before they become a Kenosha, Wisconsin.
I would tell all of our listeners to do research on Camden, New Jersey's. When Camden, New Jersey basically dissolved their police department and went to a metropolitan police department. And if you look drastically, I mean, there was a drastic change in drastic reduction in crime. There was a drastic improvement in community relations with the police department, based on the fact that they cleaned house. They cleaned house and started from scratch, and it really did. It's an amazing model to see what can happen when you really do realize that there are some problems there. You can do better, and the team that you have in place is not the ones that's helping make things better. Camden, New Jersey, do some research. I would ask the listeners to go and research that story. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, and when you talk about reforming police, that is a prime example of reforming policing, and the great success stories that they have that have came out of all the effort that they put into changing that culture of that police department and turning it completely around. So, Keith, we also want to go ahead, sir.
Well, I was going to say this real quick. You look at this sheriff that was involved in this incident, and what we have to realize in law enforcement that it's not always the physical assaults, the use of excessive force. It's the intangibles that the body language, those type of things, the failing to get out of the car and things like that. It's not what you say, it's how what you say, how you say it, your body expression. We talk about 80% of communications is nonverbal. And so when you have something like this that occurred, to me, this was no different than one of his officers using excessive force. I mean, just the things that were said, his demeanor, his attitude, the arrogance, the condescending tone, toward that gentleman. So it's not always about, we got to stop thinking that it's about putting your hands on people. It's not always about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And hey, before we come up on our next break, hey, we want to remind our listeners that you can also listen to our rebroadcast shows on thebatchelornews.airtime.pro. That's thebatchelornews.airtime.pro at 4 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with you on the law on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Greetings and great day, everyone. I am Elder Janelle Strickland, host of the Life Cafe radio broadcast from Maximizing Life Family Worship Center. I invite you to tune in every Saturday from 5 to 6 p.m. Tune in, maximize your life with the Word of God, and be blessed. Only on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Hey, we want to welcome you back to You and the Batchelor News Radio Network. We want to remind our listeners that there are many other great shows that are on the Batchelor News Radio Network. And one of those shows is the Batchelor News Radio Show with your host, L.A. Batchelor. The show discusses issues of race, politics, policing, injustice, and equality, religion, and sports that affect the black and brown and poor people negatively. You can listen live every Monday and Thursday from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at blogtalkradio.com at LA Batchelor, and on the rebroadcast at 8 a.m. and at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at thebatchelornews.airtime.pro. And if you're interested in having your own show on the Batchelor News Radio Network, or if you're interested in advertising with us, reach out to us at labachelor40@gmail.com. That's labachelor40@gmail.com. And listen and stay informed on the Batchelor News Radio Network. So we want to remind our listeners that today we're having this conversation, our part 3 of our series, Keith, on bridging the gap and how do we work to bridge the gap in this era of so much divide. With so many things that have happened across the country related to law enforcement in the black community.
Well, we got to be flexible. That's another thing. We're not flexible. We're not flexible at all. You know, we say that we do things because people say we should be doing them. We don't do things a lot of times because we want to do them or they're needed. We wait until things happen before we start looking at our training, and we start looking at wellness, and we start looking at our community engagement and things like that. You shouldn't have to wait until that. One of the things that I'd like to see more departments look at, and really your smaller to mid-sized cities, which they're the majority of the police departments in the nation, are 50 people or less. If you just really think about it. And those departments really, at some point, they've got to have a strategic plan. And if you're going to do a strategic plan, you have to sit down and bring the community in to help you develop that strategic plan. I'd like to see more police departments, even if you can't afford national accreditation. I'd like to see more departments become a part of their state accreditation process, to talk about industry standards and things like that. I think a lot of times when you're in a small to mid-sized city, for the citizens that aren't familiar with that, it's really your police departments that serve cities of about 250,000 to 300,000 and under. A lot of times you have chiefs that believe they're intimidated by the larger cities. Then you have some of the larger city chiefs that don't reach out to the smaller departments and offer their resources. And then there are those chiefs that just don't know where to go. I mean, as far as the funding and things like that. So when you don't have the funding, you do have to be creative. You have to be creative and bring people in. You have organizations out there that are willing to send people out to train you. You have to allow your people to go to training. If not, host the training. So you've got to be willing to come up and do creative things in order to make this work, in order to understand. You have to be a student of the profession. You just can't sit in your office and read books and watch TV to see what's actually going on in the nation and law enforcement. You have to find out things for yourself. You can't be so quick to jump on the bandwagon with the unions and things, and you can't be afraid of the unions. You have to run a police department from the inside out that you can be proud of internally and that the community will be proud of externally.
Yeah, exactly. And Keith, one of the things that I want to share with our listeners that, this conversation about building better relationships between the police and the black community, this is something that goes way back to the civil rights era. This is something that goes even back to, and I know you're very familiar with it. We want to share with our listeners. In 1967, there was the Kearns Commission that was put out. It was adopted appointed by President Lyndon B. Johnson to investigate the cause of uprising and rioting that year in 1967, and the recommended ways to improve relationships between police and the black community. But in the end, it just entrenched law enforcement as a means of social control. And, you had neighborhood police stations were put in public housing projects. So there were a lot of things that came out of that report that in some it was more of a negative than anything positive, because it put law enforcement more in a control over the black community, especially in the poor community, especially in public housing. So that's something that, if our listeners are not familiar with, look up the Kearns Commission and read about that and understand that, the government has tried to intervene, has tried to do some things, but Keith, I don't think that intervention has always been there's probably been some positive intentions, but there were some negative intentions that came out of it.
Well, there was two, and it's the Kerner Commission.
Kerner.
Virgil, there's been three. In 1929, you had the Wickersham Committee that looked at the same thing, because there was a lot of corruption in law enforcement, and they were looking at why there was so much corruption in law enforcement. And then you fast forward to 40 years later, 47 years later, almost 50 years later, 47 years later, then you look at the Kerner Commission, and then you look at 2015 with the Obama's 21st century policing. So in nearly 100 years, there have been three major calls for police reform. And some of those, those even back in 29 and 67, they talked about better education. They talked about community engagement. But what you have to understand, and to the listeners out there, and you don't take it from me and Virgil, you go back and you read your history, law enforcement has always been, when law enforcement was formed here in the United States, to be heavy-handed toward communities of color, to keep people under control, to keep communities of color under control. And so that's why, you have, the NAACP and LULAC and the Black Lives Matter movements are basically saying, hey, this has been going on, for hundreds of years, where police have been brought in heavy-handed. I mean, and so since when have we as police officers, and in our time, Virgil, when have we been brought in to stop somebody from voting? We're never brought in, and we're never brought in for people to protest at events like abortion clinics and things like that. We're brought in for the peace, where people start getting, becoming agitated, becoming violent. But we've never been in my career, in my 10 years as a police officer, we've never been brought in to do that. Now, reverse back 40, 50 years, that's what was going on all the time. If you had a protest, you were brought in, you were to be heavy-handed. We didn't want these protests. We didn't want these problems. We're going to show people who we are. And so that's why some people still have remnants of that in their minds when they see what's going on, the George Floyd situation. When they see that stuff, they basically feel that law enforcement is brought in to control heavy-handedly control communities of color, to get them under control and to show them where their place is. And so that's things that people have to realize, This is generational for some. This is what, you know, your great-grandparents, your grandparents, even before them, have had these experiences, and they're telling their families and their kids and their grandkids about, hey, this is nothing new. And so that's why it's important for police chiefs to know their history. And we got to quit focusing on the fact of, police officers have to quit focusing on the fact of, well, the African-American community and the communities of color are picking on us. You know, you say we're doing everything we can do. We can do better, because everybody who's wearing a uniform is hopefully wearing that uniform for the same purpose. And so I know it's unfair. It's extremely unfair for one police officer like the guy in Minneapolis to be, for you to be compared to that person. But listen, it is what it is. It's not based on the one incident in Minneapolis. It's not based on the one incident in Aurora, Colorado. It's not based on, you know, Louisville, Kentucky. It's not based on Kenosha, Wisconsin. It's based on years and years of and decades of this occurring. These are just the incidents that we know about. And I don't mean to take up a long time, but it goes back to what I've said when I go out and do speaking engagements, and I've said this to my officers. It's the fact that we had an opportunity to get it right again after the Rodney King situation. We had an opportunity.
Yeah.
And to the point, we have done some things better. We've gotten better. Let me just say that. We've gotten better at things. But you know, at the end of the day, when we keep saying we're doing our best, are we really? What can we do more of? What can we do? We can always do better. You can't say in your personal life I can do better, but then in your professional life as law enforcement, we're doing all we can.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that you bring that up, you know, with the Rodney King deal. I mean, with that, what goes back to 1992, you know, after the acquittals of the 3 officers who pretty much just savagely beat Rodney King, which was caught on a citizen's camera, in the unrest that erupted in L.A. You know, I think there were, you know, if I remember right, Keith, there were probably 50 people died. And one of the things that I found while researching for the show was that, you know, in 1994, Congress gave the Justice Department the authority to investigate patterns or practices of policing that violated civil rights protection. So the Justice Department has a lot of authority. And, you know, somebody asked me this question: is the Justice Department really a department that should be investigating policing matters because of their relationship with each other? The Justice Department plays a key role in investigating violation of civil rights era, investigating, police misconduct that is brought to the Justice Department. But, you know, Keith, when you talk about something that happened in 1992, then you talk about the current things that have happened from, you know, Michael Brown to Eric Garner to George Floyd to Breonna Taylor to all these other people that we can't even remember their names. It is just like, what is really going on? That why can't somebody get it right? And so, you know, we're coming up on our next break, and we'll finish that conversation after we come back from break, Keith, about why can't we get it right? What are police departments doing? And even to include the Justice Department, what is not being done right to change some of the things that have occurred over the past several decades? So you're listening to
and we
You
want
and
you
the
to
Law
call
on
in.
the.
Please call in.
Yeah.
Please call in.
Yeah, please call in. And also you can go into the chat room and leave your comments in the chat room, and those messages will get to us. But you're listening to You and the Law on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
If you want real discussions on politics, social issues, racial issues, and other topics, then tune into the Batchelor News Radio Show. Listen live every Monday and Thursday from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern at blogtalkradio.com And if you missed the show, you can listen every Monday through Saturday at 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. Eastern, and every Sunday at 5 a.m. and 3 p.m. at thebatchelornews.airtime.pro. Listen and be informed.
Hey, we want to welcome you back to You and the Law on the Batchelor News Radio Network, and we also want to remind everyone that you can listen to the rebroadcast shows of You and the Law on the thebatchelornews.airtime.pro. That's the thebatchelornews.airtime.pro at 4 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And just check your local listening to catch our rebroadcast shows if you can't catch us live. And you can catch our rebroadcast shows. But if you're just now joining us, we want to remind you that this is part 3 of our series of Bridging the Gap. And this week we're discussing in this era of divide, how do we bridge that gap? How does the law enforcement bridge that gap? And we want to remind those, if we got people on the line that are listening to the show, you can definitely come on air with us, or you can let the producer know that you've got a question or a comment. So don't be radio shy. Come on and talk to us and let us know what your thoughts and concerns are about bridging the gap and what concerns you may have with that's going on in your community with your involvement with your local police department. So, Keith, as we were talking, about what happened in 1992 with Rodney King and all the other things that have happened, and since 2013, I think the Black Lives Matter movement has made police violence a pressing national and local issue. And now you've got people who are really trying to make the Black Lives Matter movement out of some radical movement because of all of the things that's going on with the protesting. But the Black Lives Matter movement is peaceful protesting. You've got a lot of people who are running around with Black Lives Matter T-shirts on, and they're instigating, they're looting, they're rioting, and it's really starting to put the Black Lives BLM in a spotlight that is really kind of taken away from the true message of what Black Lives Matter movement is about.
Yeah, it is, Virgil, and it is, and that's the sad thing about it. Even police officers, we've gotten caught up in this deal that Black Lives Matter is a radical group, and it's just like people need to go back and look at their history about the Black Panthers, of why the Black Panthers started.
Exactly.
Were there some tragic things that occurred? I think if you go back and you look at the history of the Black Panthers, there was over 70 civic programs started by Black Panthers. And like I've told you before, and to the listening audience, we don't condone violence, but I think people have to go back and look at the reason why the Black Panthers were formed. And it's sort of like it's the exact same thing of why Black Lives Matter was formed. And you have to understand, and you have to be open-minded. And one of the things that's been a frustrating part of being a police officer, being an African-American police officer, being a African-American chief, the frustrating part of it is that you do have these officers that shut down when you start talking about the history, and they want to make examples of, well, this, and this, and we can all talk about things that we disagree with that people who look like us or resemble us have done. But I think the thing that makes the communities of color upset is that you minimize the purpose of the existence of these groups. You look for the violent things instead of the positive things that have been doing. And the people who started these groups are not the ones that are committing these violent acts of the looting. They're, like I said before, those normally are the people that don't even live in those cities. But unfortunately, they get the brunt of it. They're the brunt of it, or get blamed for it. So we have to look at what the purpose of the groups were. Look at the purpose of the NAACP. Look at the purpose of LULAC. Look at the purpose of Black Lives Matter. Look at why National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives was started, National Black Police Association were started, National Forum of Black Public Administrators. Look at why those organizations were founded. And then you'll understand the frustration from the communities of color when it comes to what's going on in 2020, what's going on since 2015. We talk about things happening from 2015, but really when you think about it, go back hundreds of years and decades and see the things that people believe are still going on, that are still worse. And I think then people will understand the purpose of these organizations and the purpose of the need for these organizations and strong leaders to stand up and speak out against the things that we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, and you and I had this conversation, and we pose this conversation to our listeners as well. Are police officers becoming involved in things that are not really police-related matters? We have seen police officers who have been called to hotels because a mom and her kids were swimming in the swimming pool. The lady who worked at the hotel said she didn't recognize them, or they wasn't supposed to be in the pool. Or then you see police officers being called to to restaurants because hey, this person said this person wasn't supposed to be there. I mean, again, I just think it just kind of goes back to, when does a police officer, if there's not anything that has happened that was a criminal act that really calls for the police officer to be there, they really need to remove themselves from that, because again, getting called to a major chain hotel, because a mother and her kids are swimming in the swimming pool, and now you want to ask that person for their ID. You want to ask them what kind of car you're driving. You want to ask them where's your hotel car key at. And so now when people start to refuse and not give you that information, now it becomes a police matter, because it's saying, well, you have to identify yourself. You have to tell me who you are. And things just go way left. But if you don't put yourself in those situations, again, I think a police officer shows up at Howard, at a hotel, and the clerk says, hey, there's some people that shouldn't be in the swimming pool. Well, Keith, we all know you have to have a card to get into a gate. You just can't jump over a gate. So who's going to go through all that trouble to get into a swimming pool, and you got your kids with you? So use some common sense with it, because I think that just leads up to the tension that occurs between the black community and law enforcement.
Well, it starts with that phone call, and you have to make sure your dispatchers have the proper training to ask those questions. And to the listening audience, really and truly, we have to go to calls, because what's a emergency to you may not be to us, and vice versa. However, talking to that person who called in and getting the information does trigger, hopefully, common sense, where you say, so you called me out here because you've got a person here that's swimming, and you don't think they're staying in the hotel, or you don't think they live in this apartment complex among these 600 or some units here, just because you've never seen that person. Well, we're not getting involved in that. That's not a police matter. That's a personal matter, and we're going to leave. That's the way you can handle that, unless somebody tells you something differently. Unless somebody gives you something to believe that an offense has occurred or about to occur. But it's not a crime for somebody to be, in a pool with their socks on. When you hear about this, or you got a young man that accidentally bumped into a lady, and she feels as though the young man, the 9-year-old, was had sexually assaulted her, or was inappropriately touching her, and then when you watch the video, it tells, it shows clearly that it was an accident, then go, then leave. Make your notes and just leave. You don't always have to get somebody's information, and it goes back to training. How are we training officers? Why are we training officers that you got to get a name every time you go out there? But then at the same time, we tell people everybody doesn't have to talk to you. Everybody doesn't have to warm up to you. There are just times when you have to leave. I think we're giving officers dual messages, and so that's the frustrating part about it.
You're absolutely right, and I think when you go back and you think about previous things that have happened in the country, and especially in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with the race riots. Those race riots were started because of a young black male was on an elevator, and a Caucasian lady accused him of looking at her the wrong way or inappropriately touching her, and that set off the Tulsa race riot, all because of something that somebody went and told law enforcement that happened that they didn't witness, and that just set off one of the worst race riots this country has seen. But again, you got law enforcement in the middle of it, and Keith, there is, with social media, you see so many videos of police officers interacting with young black men, and a lot of it is they're not being honest. And it just kind of goes back to this conversation that we're having today is about bridging the gap. You try to take an opportunity to build a relationship with somebody that they don't know you and you don't know them. And I'll share this with our listeners. There's a disturbing video I saw of an 18-year-old outstanding high school student going home from work, or he's on his day off. He gets pulled over. The next thing you know, the officers are asking him, does he have any guns or drugs in the car? And he says no. He gets out the car. They search the car. And eventually they just write him a citation because the reason for the stop was because he made an illegal lane change. But they call a drug dog out. They go through his car. His mom comes out. She's upset. And those officers just wasted any opportunity to build any kind of positive relationship with that young man. And he's 18 years old. He's going to remember that for the rest of his life. Will he probably have some positive encounters with some other police officers? Probably, yes. But he's going to remember that real negative encounter that he had with those police officers who pulled him over. Basically said, well, the dog said there was a scent of marijuana in the car, and so they searched him. But at the end of it, he gets put through all of this here, and he gets a traffic citation. So when you talk about bridging the gap and building relationships, oftentimes officers it's almost kind of like they forget where they come from. They put on that badge and uniform, and they just forget that, we're all humans. We need to really work with each other.
Yeah, right, man. We get emotionally hijacked. Hijacked. That's the word there. Emotionally hijacked.
Yeah, and Keith, another something else that I think that really needs to change, and I think it just goes back to when we talk about the Black Lives Matter, we talk about the NAACP, we talk about other organizations that are really trying to have this dialogue with law enforcement about changing the culture of policing. You have police administrators who want to ignore this term, and you have a president who does not even want to acknowledge that the systemic racism that exists in law enforcement. And there's going to be some people who are listening who are probably in law enforcement who will disagree with us or disagree with me and say, that's absolutely ridiculous. There is no systemic racism in law enforcement. So my question is, if there's not any systemic racism in law enforcement, why are we having the problems that we're having? Answer that question. If we didn't have systemic racism, if we didn't have these issues, why do we continue to see the things that occur? Especially, but we're so quick to come to the defense, or some people, to the defense of a 17-year-old who goes into a city, who doesn't live there, who takes it upon himself with other people to claim that they're there to protect private property, and shoots and kills 2 people and seriously injures another. But he is put out, well, he was doing what he had the right to do. How does a 17-year-old have the right to carry that type of a weapon into a community, claiming that he's there to help protect private property?
Well, I mean, Virgil, is just like when somebody says something like, well, if George Floyd had just cooperated, he wouldn't be in that situation. And my thing is on that is the most ludicrous and the most insensitive thing that you can say. It doesn't matter what he did before then. It matters the fact that he was compliant, he was under control, and he was killed. That's the thing we have to, that bothers me.
Yeah, exactly. And Keith, we're coming up on about 3 minutes to the show ends, but we want to remind our listeners that if you cannot listen to the show live, or if you come in and catch part of the show, go back and check us out on the thebatchelornews.airtime.pro. That's the thebatchelornews.airtime.pro. You can catch us every day of the week from 4 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and just check your local listings where you are to catch the rebroadcast of You and the Law. But, Keith, and also we want to remind our listeners, please go to our Facebook page, like our Facebook page, share it. We want to get our likes up and want to get the message out about You and the Law on the Batchelor News Radio Network, where, probably one of there are other podcast shows out here discuss law enforcement matters, but I think we're probably the one that is really taking this on directly, Keith, where we're just having an honest conversation with our listeners about things that are concerned to them. And we also want to let you know, hey, if you've got a topic that you would like to talk about or come on the air and talk to us, feel free. This show is for you, and this show is not just about, Chief Humphrey and Chief Green. This show is about our listeners because, Keith, as you know, we got some faithful listeners out there who are from Florida all the way up to Maryland, Virginia, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas. So we just thank everybody for definitely tuning in and listening to us.
Yeah, and I know we're getting close to time, but I got to say this, man. You know what? Man, it's an honor being on radio with you. But let me tell you something. Man, you got to be.
Come on.
But listen, you got to be a smooth brother to have a name like L.A. Batchelor. Is that not smooth?
That is smooth. Man, that's
smooth, man. I mean, he is probably one of the best producers that I've been around, and he is a smooth brother. And I will say, man, the Bachelor Pad is an amazing show. But I just had to throw that out there, man. You got to be a smooth brother to have a name like L.A. Bachelor.
L.A.
Hey, listen, guys. Say that. Thanks for saying that. The check is in the mail. Just want to let you know. Appreciate it.
All right,
hey, I got to say this now. As we come to a close, now L.A. is a smooth brother, but I got to say this now. I think we have got a smooth. A smooth song at the end of our show. So L.A. has got the swag, he's got the smoothness, but we want to make sure you come back and listen to You and the Law on the Batchelor News Radio Network. We'll see you and have a good evening.
All right, goodbye, everybody. God bless.
Bye.